Let's start with the LNP-BP Standards Association. I want to first understand and give listeners perspective. Why are standards important? What is this body meant to accomplish?
The standards are important because if you do something in a non-standard way, nobody else will understand you. Or especially, it's not that critical in the world of humans, but it's much more critical in the world of machines because humans are much more agile, at least these days. So we can adjust somehow, we can reconstruct an information which is missing. But again, we usually do that doing a lot of mistakes and errors. But unlike human, machines need a certain rules and algorithms to parse. And everything that exists in the software and hardware industry is based on standards. If you start thinking from the processors, CPUs, you would have plenty of standards like x86 architecture, then ARM architecture. It's all standards which are defining the way the hardware working, and there is a standardizing body which manages these standards. These bodies, there are multiple bodies. It's like International Standards Organization and Internet Engineering Task Force, IAEE, another standardizing body, and so on and so forth. Also, in the world of internet, everything is a standard. TCP is a standard, IP is a standard. That's where we have RFCs managed by Internet Engineering Task Force. HTTP is a standard, HTML is a standard, JavaScript, which is ECMAScript, is a standard, and these standards are managed by Web3 Consortium, by ECMA, which is another standardizing body. So if you build a protocol, which should be a networking protocol or a distributed computing protocol or smart contracting protocol, you have no other way than defining a standard way of implementing this protocol. The standards help to others to formally analyze and audit the qualities of the protocol, to do independent implementation. So standards are critical for decentralization, because if you did something and you don't explain how you can do the same thing in reproducible way, there would be no decentralization. You will end up having just a single client. And thus, if you are looking for decentralization, you have to explain how to reproduce your protocol. And the explanation how to reproduce your protocol is actually a standard. It's a definition of what standard is. Also, because working on RGB, there were multiple teams involved from different companies sharing the same interest of building a system of smart contracts on Lightning. You have to coordinate activities, and the best way how to coordinate activities is through the standardization. That's again how worldwide 3 consortium was created. W3C. It is a body which was jointly created by Microsoft, Apple, Mozilla, and other bodies who were coordinating through it in the software and browsers they were developing. So we had that feeling, me and Giacomo, because we are coming both from the academic sphere, we understood clearly that for the success of creating a new smart contracting layer, there is a need for a body which will be able to help that operation and standardization of the protocols. One of the things which Satoshi probably did wrong was the fact that he never defined Bitcoin protocol as a standard. He wrote just a software, and it led to multiple hard forks, unintended hard forks. And when it is still impossible to create another Bitcoin implementation and prove that this implementation will follow the same consensus as Bitcoin Core. Why? Because there is no standard defining what Bitcoin is. And actually, Bitcoin is whatever run on Bitcoin Core. So that was a mistake. We saw it as a mistake. So we tried to not repeat the same mistake again.
I see. This is really interesting. I want to hear now the reverse argument. I hear the argument that if Bitcoin was created as a standard, there may have been some advantages coming from that. What are the disadvantages What are the reasons why Bitcoin should not have been created as a standard? I want you to play devil's advocate here and kind of like tackle the other side of that issue.
The main disadvantage of having a standard is that usually there is a body who governs the standard, meaning that this body is itself a point of centralization, and it may introduce some changes to the standard in the future. So I don't see this as a strong counter argument, because there is counter arguments to these counter arguments. Like when you define a standard is an immutable thing always. So you say that it's ISO 1009 2001, it means that it would be never modified. The only thing that standardizing body can do is to do another standard which amends or updates the previous standard. But again, it will be a free choice of everybody to use that new standard or not to use that new standard. So it doesn't brings the previous standard out from existence. So while there is a certain centralization in the process of standardization through the standardizing body, it's still not something that is enforced upon everyone. It's an absolutely voluntary decision. So it's the same like Bitcoin Core. It's not enforced to anyone. People can fork it and use it in a different way. So I don't think that this argument is strong about this centralization. So I see the standardizing body not as a point of centralization, but as a point of coordination, which instantly loses its power the moment it tries to enforce something.
And now I want to talk about, so on Bitcoin, we started out with no standards. What about on Lightning? What was different between those two?
The Lightning started with the standards, and this set of standards called Bolt standards, like Lightning Bolt, but Bolt is also an abbreviation of, I don't actually remember, of something.
Yeah. I think it's like
but it's like capital letters Bolt, and there is now 12 standards, potentially 13 standards, actually 11 standards with another standards coming, and so it's better than Bitcoin in this way. But however, even Bitcoin was catching up with the absence of standards, inventing the process called BIP, Bitcoin improvement proposals. And BIPs actually became Bitcoin standards. The point is that BIPs, they are not covering Bitcoin itself, Bitcoin consensus. So they're covering changes to Bitcoin consensus, but there is no BIP which defines how Bitcoin originally worked. So all amendments like SegWit and Taproot, they are BIP standards, amending the status quo, which is not defined. So we are taking Bitcoin, which is undefined, and we amend it in this well-defined way, which is kind of better anyway than doing some amendments randomly without any description of these amendments or discussion of these amendments. But still, it's kind of post hoc thing. The Lightning started with the standards. However, I being actually the person who are criticizing a lot the way the Lightning standards work and were created, and it's all not only my critique, it's also a result of many discussions I had with people who are working on Lightning. Many ideas came from the critics I heard from Christian Decker, and from Giacomo again, and from Peter Todd. The problem with the bolts as standards is the fact that they are kind of randomly like splitting protocol. The Lightning thing is not something one. It's not a one thing. The Lightning is a family of different interacting protocols and layers, and people even struggling to define the layers, because maybe you heard about the very well written book called Mastering Lightning Network by René Picard and Andreas Antonopoulos and others. And this, I'm also quite good friend of René Picard, and we also had discussions about how to layer all these protocols around, and they came up with a certain layering. And if you see, there is 5 or even more layers inside the Lightning Network itself. We will come back to the layer discussion probably later. But anyway, and the standards, if you put these layers, and even in the book you see the diagram, The bolts, as a standards, they are random patches on top of this layering, so they don't reflect the real structure of the Lightning Network, and they don't actually help to modularize different parts of the Lightning Network in a way that would make them easily amendable and easily innovate with them. So that is one of the reasons, at least I think that, why Lightning Network takes so long to adopt all the new things. Like we've been for ages talking about channel splits, about channel factories, and they are kind of happening, but still they haven't happened over the last 3 or 4 years. Things like Lightning offers, Vault 12, or messaging in Lightning Network, like the one used by a Sphinx chat, they are being discussed to be merged as a standard for already more than 2 years. This all takes longer than the taproot itself in Bitcoin. So the Lightning Network, which is not a consensus layer network, so it can evolve, it doesn't require to be ossified. The Lightning Network, which was created with an idea of being reckless, quickly innovate, iterate, experiment, even not being afraid of failing, it ended up being more ossified than Bitcoin Layer 1. That is the funny part. And one of the reasons for that is the way how the standards are structured and how the governance over the standards are made. So the point, coming back to the original question, why we created this association, which were helping developing the protocol, is not just an association. It's not like LNP-BP association, but LNP-BP standards association is because we were looking for solving this, not to repeat the problem we had in Bitcoin and we have in Lightning Network, but to do that properly the way it is done by ICO and other standard bodies to avoid problems like we discussed.